Hey, beauties and beasts, welcome back to the show. Okay, now it's time to get comfortable, kick back, grab your drink, because tonight we're going somewhere that looks like paradise but holds something much darker and older. We are going to Hawaii. And before you picture a beach, a cocktail, a postcard perfect sunset, just hold that image in your mind for a moment. Because the thing about Hawaii, the thing that often gets lost when the rest of the world sees it as just another vacation destination, is that it is one of the most spiritually rich places on Earth. And there are some paths in Hawaii that do not belong to the living. And tonight we're going to talk about what happens when you step onto one. Today we're talking about the Huaka'i Pō, the night marchers. Before we get into the story, today we're going to do a pore cleaning day together. My pores these days have been so large and they just look disgusting. I will show you exactly how I get rid of sebum and blackheads. It's so cute. First, I always start with exfoliation. Right now, my skin is rough on the surface, so I too smooth it out. So in Hawaiian, Huaka'i Pō means night journey. Most people outside of Hawaii call them just the night marchers. So basically, they are the spirits of ancient Hawaiian warriors, and they move in procession along trails that have existed for centuries, through valleys, along coastlines, across lava fields. They walk those trails at night, and they have been doing this according to oral tradition since long before Western contact. And by most accounts, they are still doing it now. The interesting part about this urban legend is that this is not a story that belongs to one person or one island. This has been documented across the Hawaiian archipelago, passed down through families, and recorded by researchers and oral historians. The people who tell these stories are not describing something they read about. They are describing something that actually happened to them or to someone they trusted. So we're going to talk about what the night marchers are, where they came from, and what happens when someone encounters them. Before we get into the accounts, you need to understand the world this came from. For centuries before Western contact, Hawaiian society operated under a system called kapu. The word means forbidden, set apart, untouchable. It governed nearly every aspect of daily life: what you could eat, where you could walk, who you were allowed to look at. At the top of that system were the ali'i, the ruling chiefs. They were not simply political leaders. They were believed to carry immense spiritual power called mana, passed through divine lineage, and their presence alone was considered dangerous. In some chiefdoms, if your shadow fell across a chief's body, you could be executed. If you looked directly at certain chiefs, the punishment was immediate. Because of this, when the ali'i traveled between islands and temples, they often moved at night. And when they moved, they didn't move quietly. A royal procession could include hundreds of people, warriors in formation, torchbearers, drummers beating the pahu, which is a war drum whose sound could travel across entire valleys, men blowing the piu, a conch shell that could be heard for miles, chanters calling out the genealogy of the chief as the procession moved from one sacred temple to the next along ancient trails. And those trails connected the heiau, the temples of the Hawaiian gods. Everyone knew where they ran. Everyone knew what the sound of the drums at night meant. So, if you were outside and a procession was coming, you dropped to the ground, face down, and you didn't look up. And as I told you before, if you looked at the chief by accident, you might not live long enough to regret it. So that was the rule when the chiefs were alive. The kapu system collapsed in 1819, shortly after the death of Kamehameha the Great. His son publicly broke the sacred laws, and the old religious order fell apart within a single generation. Temples were torn down, old gods were officially set aside, but the trails remained, and according to Hawaiian oral tradition, the warriors never stopped walking them. The first written Western record of the Huaka'i Pō was documented in 1883 by Abraham Fornander, who was a judge and ethnologist who spent decades in the Hawaiian kingdom recording its history. But by the time he wrote it down, the stories were already generations old. According to those traditions, the night marchers arise on certain nights on the lunar calendar. They emerge from burial grounds, from sacred valleys. Some people say come from the sea itself. They appear as warriors in full battle regalia, feathered helmets, cloaks of red and yellow feathers, spears, and war clubs. Their torches burn with an orange light that witnesses describe as too steady and too bright for fire. And their feet do not touch the ground. They move through walls. They move through houses. Modern roads don't redirect them. The trail is the trail. And there are things that can protect you if you encounter them. Get off the path, face down, don't look. And some traditions say you should quietly recite your genealogy, because if a warrior in the procession recognizes you as a descendant, if one of them calls out, "now," which means mine, the procession will move around you. But as I told you earlier, the second rule, if one of the voices you hear belongs to someone you loved, someone who died, and that voice calls your name and asks you to come, you don't answer. Because what gets reported in multiple accounts across multiple islands is that some people do answer, and when they do, they are found later walking with the procession, passing through the dark, moving toward the marches going. And there are no accounts from anyone who answered and came back to describe it. And there's a place on the Big Island called Waipio Valley. The cliffs on either side rise nearly 2,000 feet. Waterfalls drop from the top and disappear into mist before they reach the valley floor. The valley itself is almost a mile wide, filled with taro fields and wild ginger. And at the far end, the rivers pour straight into the ocean. Waipio is something called the Valley of the Kings. And this is where generations of Ali'i, the chiefs, were buried. Their bones hidden so carefully that many have never been found. The valley floor is considered one of the most spiritually charged places in all of Hawaii. And the Ali'i are at rest, but the warriors who served them are not. And that is what the Huaka'i Pō are. Men who spent their lives guarding their chiefs, walking these trails, moving between the temples in the dark. And when they died, they kept doing it. But not because they were lost, not because they didn't know they were dead, because that was their purpose. And in purpose, in this tradition, doesn't end with the body. The chiefs they served have been in the ground for centuries. The temples they were marching between have crumbled. The trails have been paved over, built on, and forgotten. And they are still walking. A man named Mel grew up in Kauai on the Big Island, and his account is part of Pacific Worlds, which is an oral history archive that documents the memories of Native Hawaiian communities. These are recorded testimonies, not folklore collections. So Mel's grandfather built a house in Kauai, a real house, 4 rooms, solid construction. But when he planned the back section, the people who knew the land told him something. There was a trail running through that property, very old, older than anyone alive could trace. And the night marchers used that trail. So Mel's grandfather didn't try to block it. He tore out the back portion of his own house and rebuilt around the path. He just left it open. And Mel asked him once why. And his grandfather told him, if you put anything in their way, they will walk through it. And he explained where the marchers came from, Hanakohau Gulch, known as the Valley of the Chiefs and Warriors, and where they were going, Pu'ukahola Heiau, the great temple Kamehameha built on the hill above the harbor. And that trail had been walked for centuries. And the back section of the house was left dark. You know, the kind of dark where you hold your hand in front of your face and can't see it? One night, Mel woke up and he'd been told what to listen for. And he heard it. First, it sounded like metal, like pans cracking in heat. Then, underneath that, something heavier, slow, like chains dragging. So he went to the window, and these beings, they passed outside in formation, torches moving through the dark, heading toward the heiau on the hill. He watched until they were gone. And he stayed awake for a long time after. The question he kept returning to was not whether they were real. He already knew the answer to that. He wondered, is this what they do forever? Will they still be walking long after everyone who remembers them is gone? After the houses are torn down? After the roads cover the trails? Will they still be walking? This might just sound like another folklore to you, but the accounts are consistent in ways that are really hard to explain. People from different islands, different generations, different backgrounds who have never met each other, they describe the same sequence. First, the drums. It's always the drums. And then the torches. They are too bright, too orange, moving in line that doesn't waver. And then the conch shell. One, a long, low note that seems to come from more than one direction all at once. And then the smell. And this is the detail most people don't expect. Witnesses describe it differently. Salt and decay, something old. But they agree on one thing. It arrives before the procession does, before the sound and before the light. And by the time you smell it, they're already close. A woman named Kule grew up visiting a remote stretch of coastline on the Big Island called Kealakekua Bay. No electricity, no running water, reachable only by boat. And at night, her family lay out on the beach watching the stars. Sometimes her father would point toward the mountains, lights moving slowly down the slopes in a line. He would tell his children quietly, those are the night marchers. He taught them what to do. If you're on a trail and something suddenly feels wrong, if the air grows heavy, if you feel a pressure around you that wasn't there before, you have to step off the trail, turn your back, and lower your head. And you have to wait until it passes. Years later, Kule asked her father if he actually believed it. He thought about it and said, "If you don't believe it, you should respect it anyway." Those are people who were here long before us. There was a caretaker at a house near Kealakekua named Kaneshiro. Kaneshiro was a quiet man, a Japanese man, described by the people who knew him as steady and practical. He watched over a house there and kept it in order, and he took that responsibility seriously. The house had been built on one of the old trails. No one had told the people who built it, or if they had been told, they hadn't listened. The house went up and Kaneshiro was hired to look after it. And for a while, everything was ordinary. Then it started. He would go to sleep in his bed inside the house, of course, but wake up outside in the yard on the ground. First time, he might have explained it away. Strange night, something he ate. But it kept happening. And each time, he remembered more of it. He could feel them coming before he was fully awake. A pressure in the room, something changing in the air the way it changes before a storm. Except there was no storm. Then the weight starting at his feet and moving up. Footsteps across his body, one after another, heavy and evenly spaced, like something was crossing him the way you'd cross a floor, moving through him as if he were part of the ground. He said it didn't hurt. He said it felt like being pressed down into the bed and then through it. Then he would find himself outside, lying in the yard, and the house would be behind him. And the night would be quiet, and whatever had passed through was already gone. He was never seriously injured, and he kept going back. Every morning after it happened, he would get up off the ground, go back into the house, and go about his work. Not because he didn't believe what had happened, but because it was his job. The house needed looking after, and he was the one looking after it. And he wasn't broken by it. He wasn't running from it. He just kept going back inside. The house was on that trail, and he knew that. And the trail wasn't going to move, and he knew that too. Kaneshiro was one man, one house, and one trail. But this is not always a small story. During construction of the Waikoloa Hilton on the Big Island, Hawaiian priests warned the developers that a night marcher trail ran directly through the property. But the contractors ignored them, and things began going wrong on that construction site. And they were serious enough problems, frequent enough, that eventually the warnings were no longer ignored. And after that, the resort was redesigned around the trail. There is a cobblestone path running through the property today, unobstructed, following the direction of the ancient trail. And it goes nowhere a guest would need to go. It serves no practical purpose, but nobody blocked it. Engineers and contractors with deadlines and insurance policies decided it was easier to redesign an entire resort than to stand in the path of the march. So, from the story so far, it seems like they just march away, doing their own thing, whether people watch or not. But not all encounters end that way. They say sometimes you get invited to march with them, and once you do, you never come back. In downtown Honolulu, in the middle of the financial district, there is a modern office tower called the Davies Pacific Center. So it's all glass and steel, security cameras on every floor. At night, March Your Trail runs directly through that building. In 2012, a storyteller and a cultural practitioner, Lopaka Kapanui, was invited by attorneys in the building to look at something the security cameras had recorded, a long column of movement passing through the lobby late at night. And they weren't people, they weren't reflections. They were something else moving through the space in formation. Around the same time, a native Hawaiian woman who cleaned the building late at night walked into what she later described as a column of mist in one of the corridors. And she died the following day. A month later, someone reported seeing her in the building after hours walking with the procession passing through the far wall. And there is another similar story recorded in the Pacific World's archive that might change the way you think about all of this. A woman named Hannah spent years documenting oral traditions on the Big Island. And she recorded this account from a woman who, if alive today, would be well over 100 years old. This woman grew up on land that is now part of the Kona Village Resort. When she was a child, something happened one evening that the elders in her community recognized immediately. A wind came down from the mountains, not a storm wind, not the steady trade wind. It was something different the elders had felt before. And they moved quickly. They tied the girl to a chair using strips torn from flour sacks and told her, "Do not move. Do not listen. And whatever you hear over the next hour, don't look. It's not meant for you." But she was a child, so she looked. The procession moved through their settlement like figures passing through fog. And the people walking in it were not strangers. They were neighbors, relatives, family members who had already died. As they passed through, they called out softly to the people inside the house. They spoke their names. They asked them to come. The elders sat completely still and didn't answer. The girl tied to the chair couldn't move even if she'd wanted to. Years later, when she had children of her own, the same wind came again. The same drums, the same voices in the dark. And this time she was the one holding her son, still telling him, "Do not look, do not answer, and do not listen," because some invitations are not meant to be accepted. So, in traditional Hawaiian belief, the warriors who served their chiefs in life continued serving them in death. Their loyalty didn't end when their bodies did. The procession they once walked in the physical world continued in the spiritual one. The world around them changed completely. The kapu system collapsed within a generation. Temples were destroyed. The old gods were declared false. In the decades that followed, the native Hawaiian population was devastated by disease and displacement. Before Western contact, estimates of the native Hawaiian population ranged from several 100,000 to over 800,000 people. By the early 1900s, fewer than 40,000 remained. And through all of it, according to the stories, the march continued through valleys where temples had crumbled, across land where highways were later poured, through the lobbies of office towers and the grounds of resort hotels, still following the same trails, still moving toward the same temples, still on certain nights calling out to the living by name. And the question that stays with most people who hear these stories isn't whether the night marchers are real. It's what it means that they're still walking. Nobody knows, but the trails are still there even when we can no longer see them. And the march is still happening even when we can no longer hear it. So, if you're ever in Hawaii after dark on a trail that feels older than it should, and the wind drops, and you can catch a smell you can't place, and somewhere below you the drums begin, step off the path and get low. And if you hear a voice you recognize, someone you've lost, someone you loved, speaking your name from the dark, don't answer. That is the end of tonight's story. Sleep tight, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye-bye. Yeah.